Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Tonight's guest is the Assembly Member from the 84th Assembly District. We have a lot to talk with her about, including the election just passed, as well as look into the future, the next session that's coming up in Albany. We'll talk about other items like congestion pricing, the City of Yes, and so much more. Let's not waste time. We get right to it. The 84th Assembly District includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Mott Haven, Concourse, and Highbridge. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk Assembly Member Amanda Semptimo. Assembly Member, nice to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Gary. It's always great to be here.
Well, congrats, first of all, on your own victory. Let's see, 72% of the vote went your way. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Statewide, New York Democrats did well. They did their part in overturning 3 congressional seats, which is going to help the balance in Congress. Election day did show a massive shift to the right across the country and in the normally Democratic borough of the Bronx. Trump received a higher vote percentage in all 5 boroughs compared with 2000. Why do you think that happened?
Well, you know, Gary, I think this election was really a big message to us Democrats. We go to work every day to fight for people in our communities, but these election results show us that folks in our communities are not feeling that. They're not feeling that Democrats are necessarily representing the issues that are important to them. And I think here in the Bronx especially, when you see people voting for Trump, it was actually less in support of Trump and his policies, but more of a protest vote against the party, and really sort of jolting the party to wake up and say, how can we make sure that the work that we're doing, we know that it improves the lives of New Yorkers, but how can we make sure that they feel that?
Is it a simple situation of kitchen table issues versus social issues?
I would say so, but you know, we work on kitchen table issues as well, right? We've raised the minimum wage to put more money in people's pockets. We're constantly working on sort of quality of life, day-to-day issues, but it's possible that we're not necessarily hitting it on the head in the ways that people need to feel it the most. And so that means listening more to what people have to say, making sure that our message aligns with what people are actually saying and that our policies do as well.
We had 2 of your colleagues here a couple of weeks ago, and I brought up the point because they said essentially the same thing you did. And I brought up the point that I recalled before the election there was very good economic news. Inflation had kept going down. The job numbers had risen. I think there was like 200 or 300,000 new jobs created. And in fact, gas prices, I know that, gas prices have gone down. Yet I never heard that out of Kamala Harris's mouth or other local people because they were focused on some of those other issues.
Right.
That's the kind of thing you're talking about.
Yes, exactly
right. It's a publicity thing in a way.
Right. But I think also making sure that people actually feel the difference. When we're talking about averages, that's when you can hide inequities. And communities like the South Bronx, you know, when you say crime is going down, but you look at some of our communities in the Bronx, it's like, well, it doesn't feel like that here. And you say, you know, jobs are going up, but people in our community are still struggling to find jobs. You know, inflation's going down, but groceries are still really expensive. And so I think we've got to really get to the heart of those disconnects where you say things are getting better, but people are not feeling it.
One of your colleagues, Udelka Tapia, said that Democrats missed the message that would go to black and brown communities, that their issues are not being assessed properly, and Democrats just simply didn't talk to them, didn't really understand what's going on in their communities. You agree with that? Is she being too harsh, or is she on the right track?
I think she's doing what a lot of people do, which is sometimes conflating. The reality is that there's a lot of space between what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden do and what we do here on the ground. And I think that messaging at a national level is naturally going to be different than messaging that happens in a community like the South Bronx and on a level like New York City. So you kind of really can't compare those apples to oranges, but I think we should all lean into the responsibility of having to do work that feels responsive to the needs that people are putting forth every day.
There was talk, and actually your assistant mentioned it to me, that there was talk about getting together before the session to kind of get everybody's heads together to realize what had happened and strategize from a political point of view as well as legislative point of view. Is that happening?
We've done that, actually.
Oh, you've done it?
We've done that. We've done that. We're moving fast.
Where was I?
No, but we've kind of come together as Democrats in the Bronx to say, what are the things that we need to take away? How can we go into this next session strong, focused on what people are saying, what people are feeling, and making sure that we're being responsive?
And you're happy with the results of that? You think is there something to tell about it?
I think it was just a first conversation of us sort of coming together, and I think it'll be the first of many.
All the assembly members, the senators?
It was Bronx elected officials actually coming together
officials.
to say what happened, what are we going to do, how do we chart a path forward together.
A leading issue, I assume it's a leading issue, is immigration and what the next president plans to do with migrants. Are you concerned? Have you heard from constituents about, gee whiz, what am I going to do? Am I in jeopardy? I mean, what's your look at that issue?
Yeah, we've certainly heard from constituents, many folks who are nervous. It's not just a question of migrants, but the Trump administration and Trump himself has been really forward about his plan to aggressively pursue folks who are in the country undocumented. And that is something that gives people a lot of pause because we know we have a lot of undocumented neighbors here in New York. And we want to do what we can to make sure that folks who have been here, who are just raising a family and seeking to make a better life for themselves, are protected. And we will sort of explore what our options are on the state level to make sure that folks have access to due process. There have been some comments in the news lately of some of our elected leaders saying, get people right out. And that's cruel. There are families here. There are people who have been here for decades, longer than I've been alive, who don't have access to documentation because we have a broken immigration system. And so we need to sort of be mindful and be thoughtful in this process. And we certainly have a problem with a system that's broken, and we have to fix it. But that doesn't mean throwing folks out of the country.
Do you hear, I'll just use this as an example from a family that says, well, 3 of us are documented, and maybe dad came here last, or mom came here last, or the children eventually came here, and they never got documented, and now they're worried that they would be handpicked and sent out. Do you hear that? Because that's what I've assumed is going to unfortunately happen, or at least be attempted to happen.
Yes, and we do have many families in our district that are mixed status, and so what you'll often see is children who have documentation because they were born American citizens, but parents who maybe don't have because they overstayed a visa or something, and that causes anxiety, of course, when you think about parents being deported without their children.
Proposition 1 made a pretty good attempt at codifying some of the issues of racial justice, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the kind of either legislation or rulemaking that can intercede here to say, well, New York City, New York State, we kind of view the world a little differently?
I don't know that we'll be able to do those sorts of things, though we certainly will be working to be creative wherever we can. I think it'll be more in terms of policy, how we interact with the federal government. When you think about, we hear often the phrase like sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, whether our local governments will decide to collaborate with ICE as they're on this sort of deportation mission. Those are the kinds of decisions I think we'll have to make.
I feel like, and we can evaluate the mayor separately, but I feel like in this particular case, the mayor is kind of in a no-win situation because maybe in theory, and certainly as a New Yorker, he may want to say, well, yes, we are a sanctuary city. But the minute he does that, that puts a big X mark on it for this new administration. So he's got to kind of say, well, I'll work with you, but
I mean, I would hope that the mayor's top priority is protecting New Yorkers, however that happens. I don't know that you could put a bigger target on New York than it already has. We are the land of immigrants, right? And we're proud of that. That's part of our legacy. It's part of our story. And I certainly think it will continue to be part of our future. And I hope that the mayor is connected to that.
I saw that they were removing National Guard troops from migrant centers because they didn't want the feds to have easy access to military right there. And so let's get them out, and if they want to do it, let them start. I thought that was kind of an interesting
Exactly. The
twist.
creative kind of solutions that we need to be after.
What other concerns do you have about a Trump presidency and what it might mean for maybe funding that you use in your district or other issues in the district? Maybe public housing, which we have needed a huge investment. We get a little bit, but not enough, of course.
Right. I mean, I think funding is probably the primary concern. New York is already in a position where we really function as the economic engine for the nation. And so we give so much more in terms of economic output to the federal government. And that's okay. We're part of a union. We're here to support each other, support other states. But we're already at the losing end of the deal. So when we hear Donald Trump talking about targeting New York in specific ways, it does make me nervous because, even when you're looking at 7 to 10% of our funding coming from the federal government, that's a sizable amount that we would miss. Those are gaps that we would certainly feel. And so we will be fighting tooth and nail.
In what issues? I mean, I mentioned public housing. Is that I'm sure is one, but what
it's
else
really,
do you look at that you get now that you think could be looked at differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really everything, but one of the primary ones is when you're looking at healthcare funding. Healthcare funding is a big part of the funding that we do on the state level and of the spending that we do on the state level, and it's also an important part of money that we get from the federal government when you're talking about Medicaid, et cetera. So that's one area that gives me a lot of pause because it's also one of the larger parts of federal spending. And when you look at some of the other big parts, it's defense spending. I don't see Trump, maybe they'll play with numbers, move things around, but I don't think they're going to meaningfully cut defense spending. They're not going to cut Social Security. That would be wildly unpopular, I think, even though they claim that they will. I will be surprised if they do in any meaningful way.
I think there's been a balance on whether they claim it. I mean, he says, I would never do it, but then, of course, there's the drumbeat and the people he's bringing in might.
I think ultimately that would be disastrous politically, and I don't think they would do that. And so the next kind of big place that you see a lot of spending is in healthcare, and I can imagine that that's a place that they might look to save money.
And certainly in our very vulnerable borough of the Bronx and in your district in the South Bronx is of concern.
Yes.
The waterfront, we had land stewards here wanting to take control of the southernmost part of the Bronx. We showed some pictures here that the waterfront was in terrible shape and it's public land and it should be made accessible, et cetera, et cetera. I'm guessing that would also be a concern. You say, well, we want to get a grant for infrastructure monies or for monies to fight climate change.
Right.
All of a sudden, that stuff
dries up.
Yeah,
no,
that's
certainly
an ironic word to use when you talk about the waterfront.
Correct. Though it is an issue in some other parts of the country and our neighbors up north. But I think we're doing everything that we can to just be prepared and be fighting and thinking creatively of how we can challenge problematic policies when they take place, and also, again, be sort of a bulwark and say, okay, here's the line and here's how we're going to sort of fortify this position. But we will see.
You and I had this discussion just before the show, and now we're telling you what we talk about, about gentrification, the large projects in the southwestern part of the borough is this Bankside property. But they've opened up a waterfront, which has been neglected, as we've just documented. Are you satisfied that this is kind of a good give back, even though we're getting housing that might not be directly for Bronxites? Like, what's your thought on the whole image of that?
Those are projects that predate me in terms of their approval, and so I won't say, we got a fair deal there. I think that when we're looking at the overall sort of concept of development of communities, you need to take a bigger look, and the fact that there's not one green space in Mott Haven, nobody's getting a good deal if somehow you're building skyscrapers that are going to make some folks a lot of money, and we still don't have a green space in Mott Haven. So I won't ever say that those deals were perfect.
And some of those apartments are not filled, you indicated.
Correct,
to me.
right. So I won't say that was a good deal. I think anytime there's access to the waterfront that's open, it's a positive, anywhere that you are. I do think that we have more to do to let people know that the waterfront is there, that it's accessible, that it's public, and that they should be making use of it.
It is a public waterfront, even though it's kind of part of that property.
Exactly. And we want folks to know that.
And you don't think enough people know that?
No, in fact, I know that there was some confusion about that at some point, but there have been, South Bronx Unite is one group that has been doing incredible work to make sure that people know that they have access and that it's clear. And so that's probably some work that needs to continue.
People in the North Bronx, not your district, are very concerned that congestion pricing will mean cars coming in, let's say, from Westchester or points north and want to park and jump on the subway. So all of a sudden, the North Bronx will be inundated with more traffic than they're getting in lower Manhattan because of congestion pricing. Do you have concerns being on the southernmost part of the district, or do you think your constituents take the trains, take mass transit, you welcome the funding?
The vast majority of our constituents take public transit, and so improving the MTA, improving our public transit system is one of my top priorities always. But we also always want there to be a balance, and I think that there are thoughtful policies that we can pursue. An example is local parking permits. We've seen that work really well in other cities where residents are given
that's a good idea.
parking permits for specific areas. And so if you have folks who are parked in an area that they shouldn't be, then they're getting ticketed accordingly. And so I don't think you have to always throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can anticipate some of the problems and implement creative solutions, and I think that's one of those.
That's one of them. In terms of the governor canceling it at first because it was $15, some people said it was a political move on her part because it politically wouldn't work coming into the election season. What did you think of that whole thing? And then, of course, now reinstating it all of a sudden with a cheaper price, a $9 price, because of the fear of having, rely on the federal government, and that would have been a bigger problem.
You know, Gary, I am never
here we
going to try to make sense of Kathy Hochul's decisions. I will let her. You should invite her on and have her explain.
Let her answer that.
Yes.
Boy, there you go. That's an answer without giving an answer. I think we all appreciate that. And then on that note, Richie Torres has come out to say he's considering a run. Certainly, when he speaks, he knows what he's talking about. He's that sort of elected official. Do you, number one, anticipate that he will run? And then do you know if you would support that yet, or it's too early to have this conversation?
I haven't spoken with the congressman about it yet personally, but I think he has made clear that it's something that he's considering. And I think we're in a very delicate moment for Democratic leadership right now. And we need leadership that's going to be strong, that's going to be bold, and that speaks to all communities across New York. And like we started this conversation, our communities have clearly expressed dissatisfaction with the direction that our party has been taking, and we have to be earnest in our reconsideration of how we're doing things. And
earnest and honest with yourselves about what might have
we need to
gone
do.
wrong.
Exactly. And so we have elections for a reason, and I think it's to make sure that we're keeping the pulse and that we're close to the issues and that we're giving people what they want. And so.
Just not to pick on her because she was here, Assembly Member Tapia felt that, we used to talk about the three men in the room. Now it's, the two women and a man, but
Sure.
There's no Hispanics in that room. Do you feel like the understanding of Hispanic culture by the powers that be it has been missing? That's one of the issues?
100%, 100%. When you look at and I don't think it necessarily is about that room, but I think it's the larger question. When you look at the leadership for the state party on the Democratic side, there are 12 executive board members, not one of them is of Latino descent. And so when you're talking about such a major part of our state, 20% of our population identifies as Latino, and you're not even sort of accounting for that in the highest rungs of leadership in the party, you have a gap and you're having a blind spot, and it has impact. And so one of the things that I'm really proud to say that we're working on now is the Lucha campaign, which is an acronym for Latinos United for Change, which is a coalition of organizations that are Latino-led and Latino-serving across New York State, coming together to put together a Latino legislative agenda that will speak to the issues related to the community and pursue $350 million in next year's budget for these same organizations to be responsive to a community that has not gotten the attention that it needs.
This is kind of like a little personal moment, and we'll leave the politics aside.
Yeah.
I learned from sitting in this seat, it's clear what my ethnicity is, the color of my skin, et cetera, et cetera. And I really have learned over the years, talking with officials and people in our communities, that there is a sense of parallel lives, that black people lead their lives, Hispanic people, and all other people. And I really wasn't aware of that because having brought up in a place where you believe in fairness and everybody is equal, and I certainly feel that way and treat people that way, but it really is true. So then there are people who would look at that and say, well, you have people of color or black people running things, but there really is a need to understand individual identities in their representation.
100%.
Am I getting that right?
100%. And it's not just in terms of sort of making people feel good and feel seen, though that is equally important. But when you look at the outcomes, the Latino community in New York is behind in every single outcome that matters. We're the lowest in home ownership, the highest renters, the highest eviction rates, the lowest income, Latino children live at the second highest poverty rate in all of New York State, the lowest amount of business owners, right? So when you look at every statistic that matters, the Latino community is being left behind. And you have to say that there must be some correlation in the fact that the Latino community is not represented in the leadership of the state.
You know, I'm smiling because, not because that's a nice thing to hear, but because it took a losing election to get the attention for that, as opposed to the fact, well, these numbers, you know, exist.
I will say the Lucha Coalition, we started
well before
the
but
election.
I'm talking about the other side of people who
Now
might
peaking.
react to it.
Agreed.
Fascinating.
It's unfortunate.
Listen, I've got to ask you about the city of Yes. Are you concerned? Now, today is Thursday. Today is the day the city council is going to vote or change it or decide what to do. What are your concerns? What do you like part of it? Does some of it work? Did you like the modifications that were done by the land use committee? What do you think?
You know, I think that housing is one of the #1 issues that people mention across the board, no matter where you are in the city, no matter what level of elected you are. And so I think it's important that the city is taking seriously and getting support from the state to do so, the charge of building more housing and making sure that we sort of unlock this crisis. Now, I am really hopeful that City of Yes will dig deep into affordability. And
They made an attempt at it in the land use committee,
Right.
in the zoning committee. We realized that.
Right, and that I think is an important recognition of what people have been saying, that for many years affordable housing has been built, and they say affordable for who. And so I hope that City of Yes in all of its forms will be aiming to create the type of housing that's needed in communities like ours in the South Bronx.
Got two issues left here for you,
Sure.
Assembly Member. The Horizon Juvenile Center is in your community. There was a detailed report released by the Department of Investigation that said they've become overwhelmed and more difficult to manage in the 7 years since the Raise the Age put more teens into the system. They, of course, are more complicated people to incarcerate, so to speak, or to rehabilitate, if you will. What's your thought? What do you hear about the Horizon Center in the community? And is this a problem? And is there something that you or others in the state can do to kind of square it away? Is it funding? I mean,
Sure. I mean, I think we could probably do a whole segment on just this. I think
I'm sure we can.
There's certainly more funding. If they're saying that they're overwhelmed and they need more resources, we want to get them whatever they need to be able to serve these clients. But one of the other things that I've heard about Horizons is that there was a big lawsuit related to young people who were spending time there and who were abused, many allegations of abuse by the staff there. And so I am reticent to take at face value everything that we are told from folks who are working there. Everything has its process, and folks will tell their story, and things will play out in court. But when you have as many allegations of abuse and as many folks saying that things are not going right in this facility, then I think we need to take a closer look overall at how it's being run.
I guess the response to that sounds similar to what we've heard about Rikers. I mean,
Right.
the last report, now they're talking about receivership
Yep.
at Rikers. And among the issues, there are many issues, but among the issues that even staff is not assigned properly, that they don't have the right schedules and the right coverage, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
These are the kind of things that I guess it's the State Department of Corrections, right, that has to deal with.
Correct.
All right. The other thing that's on my mind, and I know people in the community are concerned about, St. Mary's Rec Center was closed for construction and rehabilitation. That's a wonderful thing. But now we're in 2024, and I think, what are the numbers now? 2 more years, or what are we waiting for?
You know, this has been a really difficult process for the community because the St. Mary's Rec Center is such an important bastion of
all
support
the rec centers,
for, right.
we want them all.
Right. No,
Sorry,
and they all
I'm
matter.
Selfish. I'm sorry. I want them all.
As do we. And they all play a critically important
Of
role for the
course.
local community.
Especially if you're talking about teen problems, et cetera, et cetera. We got to give them something to do.
Yes.
Those are the kinds of places we need. Sorry, I had to.
No,
editorialize.
please. We need that kind of advocacy. You need to run for office.
That won't happen.
But
Appreciate
we're doing what we can to support organizations that have really worked to activate the park itself. Obviously, that poses an issue in the winter when it's just too cold to do programming outside. But we're also working closely with the Parks Department to make sure that they have everything they need to move the process as quickly as they can.
Do we know what the delay is? I mean,
I think that's probably better suited for the Parks Commissioner. But I think, sometimes when you're going through a construction process, you run into issues. And I think, especially in a post-COVID world, there have been some more delays than people have expected in several things. And I think, unfortunately, this is another victim.
Let's just talk about the future. The next session, do you have in your mind, well, when I get back there, I'm going to do this, that, or the other? What's on your mind? We've heard some things, obviously.
I mean, so Lucha, Latinos United for Change, this is a really important campaign to make sure that Latinos across New York are getting access to the resources and program and support that they need to change some of these really horrifying statistics about the community. So that's certainly top of mind, and making sure that the legislative agenda along with it also advances. But one of the other things that we're really excited about is to dig into support for tech programs here in the borough. I'm sure you remember the governor made a rather unfortunate comment about children in the South Bronx some months ago.
No, I do remember it, and I had forgotten it till this moment. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, it was a painful moment, right? And so, but we always want to be making sure that we're doing the work to close the digital divide as it exists in the South Bronx, and make sure that we're upskilling our residents, our students, because technology is the future, and we are wanting to do a big push for that as well.
What is the kind of thing that you would need to do? Are we talking about Wi-Fi everywhere, or in housing projects, or more iPads given out? I mean,
it's
in
some
the schools.
of that.
I mean,
it's some
to
of
me,
that.
that's just a financial thing.
Right, that's some of that. Those are sort of basic infrastructure things that you can do, but it's also giving people the access to the skills and the programming that will help them know. I couldn't sit down right now. I know how to use a laptop, but I couldn't sit down in front of a laptop and suddenly become a computer programmer. But if I'm wanting to build a career, break cycles of generational poverty that have had a grip on our community, then maybe I should be teaching young people how to be able to do that. And so it's really leaning into organizations and infrastructure that already exists that's doing this well, and help them grow.
Curriculums in schools. I mean, getting kids ready for work is
critical.
Right at the top of the list.
Yep.
Listen, we're going to have you back at some point.
Yes.
Assembly Member Amanda Semptimo, thank you so much. Thanks for your hard work for the Bronx.
Thank you.
And we will invite you back. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for your work. Thank you, Gary.
Listen, we thank everybody. Of course, our producer is Rebecca Hemick. Our director, Will Guzman. Urellis Encarnacion is on graphics. Ian Neville on audio. The editor, Yenelsida Diaz. We have a cast of thousands. Joe is here. Mary is here. And, of course, we thank you, too, the people of the Bronx. So, if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll be back next week.